Thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Michelle Hargrave, Executive Director of the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts, and I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming you to tonight's wonderful talk and reception. Tonight we are here to celebrate the incredible advocacy and stewardship of Joy and Timothy Light. They have been friends of the KIA for many, many years, and as many of you know, under Jim Bridenstine's leadership and working with Vicki Wright, Tim and Joy created the Joy Light Gallery of Asian Art in 2007. And this gallery is a dedicated space for the display and appreciation of Asian art from a wide range of periods and mediums. The Light's generosity also extended to the creation of the Joy Light East Asian Art Acquisition and Exhibition Fund, which supports the presentation and acquisition of artworks by artists of East Asian descent for the KIA's collection, providing opportunities for people in the greater Kalamazoo region to experience these great works firsthand. And since 2010, this fund has supported nearly 47 exhibitions and the acquisition of 76 artworks. So, yay! And today we're also here to celebrate the opening of the anniversary show, Promised Gifts from the Joy and Timothy Light Collection, which explores the artistic evolution of East Asian art through a diverse selection of Chinese, Korean, and Japanese artworks from their unique collection, which is 50 years in the making. And during this time, the Lights introduced communities across the US to Chinese, Japanese, and Korean art through community presentations, gallery exhibitions, and direct sales to collectors. The Lights work to foster appreciation for East Asian art and support the careers of Chinese and Japanese artists who have become some of the most sought after artists of our era. Moreover, the exhibition is a highlight of the transformative gift of the 68 works to the Kalamazoo Institute of Art, bringing the total number of works that the Lights have supported entering our collection to 144. So everyone, please join me in thanking Joy and Tim for their impact on the KIA and our community. Thank you for your vision and your dedication and to supporting the arts of East Asia, and to supporting them not only at the KIA, but also in Kalamazoo and in communities around the nation. So thank you. And thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate Joy and Tim, this wonderful exhibition, and to mark this momentous occasion. Your support is invaluable. Many of you are members, and your membership enables us to present ambitious exhibitions like this one, to present the exhibitions, the programs, and the classes that you all enjoy. If you're not a member, then we warmly invite you to join the KIA family, and please see me or Catherine or any of the other staff here. We'd be happy to welcome you to the family. And by becoming a member, you support the KIA's mission and enjoy exclusive benefits such as free admission to exhibitions, discounts on art classes, and invitations to member-only events. I'd also like to extend my thanks to Rahima Barber, Catherine Ransbottom. Rahima couldn't be here tonight, but Catherine is here. And to the entire curatorial team, as well as to the staff across all of the departments in the museum for their dedication to providing wonderful and unique art experiences and for their great work on the anniversary show. And I'd also like to give a special thank you on behalf of everyone at the KA to Mary-Louise Totton for joining us tonight and sharing insights and details on the works in Tim and Joy's collection. And thanks as well to Greg Wazowski, who will now very kindly introduce Mary-Louise. Thank you all.
Maybe just a couple words along the same line, that there are many people who are passionate collectors and have the resources to do this, but there are far fewer who will share it with others, particularly in the community, to the degree that the Lights have. And I just thought that it's really an exceptional part of what they've done, and we're delighted that they have done so. Well, I should say I'm Greg Wiskowski. Normally I do the introductions for Art Break, but when I decided to move it to coincide with this event, which I thought was really wonderful, I came along as well. And so our guest today to talk about the exhibition is Mary-Louise Totton, and she too is a longstanding member of the community that's contributed a great amount to the cultural life of Kalamazoo. She's probably best known to most of us as a teacher at the Frostic School of Art at Western Michigan University, where she has taught for the past 20 years. Her focus in education is on Asian and African art in a general sense, but her particular specialty is with Indonesian art. And to that extent, she's written a great many articles. She's organized workshops and lectures, and really been very involved internationally in promoting Indonesian art. I should add too that she's the author of a book entitled Wearing Wealth and Styling Identity, which is about the use of the tapas fabric or weavings in Sumatra. And while this sounds like maybe a kind of an esoteric subject, it's, first of all, just a beautiful book, and it highlights some little known artwork that's really remarkable. So I did want to plug her book, particularly for those of you who are interested in fabric. It's really good. So I finally added, she is also an artist herself, very active, and it's kind of fascinating to see how she's taken what she studies in a scholarly way, and then has really incorporated or derived or kind of expanded on it in her own very personal artwork. I think that's fascinating as well. So please welcome Mary-Louise Totton.
Hi, everybody. Okay. There we go, the light effects. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be invited here to discuss the anniversary exhibition and promised gift of 26 artworks. I had the number 26, maybe I got that wrong, from the Joy and Tim Light collection to the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts. I got to know Joy and Tim soon after I arrived in Kalamazoo to teach Asian and other non-Western art historical courses at Western Michigan University almost 20 years ago. Goodness. I know of no other people in town that have been as committed and persistent with bringing more awareness of Asian art and cultures to Southwest Michigan, which has, of course, helped me in my efforts to do the same. So thank you, Joy and Tim. The Light collection is very diverse in style, subject, and technique, which demonstrates the fulsomeness of the two-dimensional art of East Asia in the modern era. Joy tells me that she began showing the work of these artists in the US as a favor to artists who at the time had few opportunities to show their work. She would set up a showing for a few days at a rented space in Arizona or sell out of her home by appointment. As Claire notes, it was a gallery. Hong Kong, as I remember it in 1980, had no active gallery scene. Thus, artists must have been rather pleased to have a representative who took no commission except to cover expenses in the US. Collecting in Tokyo, Joy was guided by her friendship with Norman Tolman, whose gallery, the Tolman Collection, has a focus on Japanese prints. All in all, Joy and Tim chose the art that appealed to them as they became more familiar with various artists and their work in Hong Kong, Taipei, and Tokyo. Thus, this collection grew rather organically in fits and starts as the Lights developed their tastes. This speaks to the vagaries of patronage and the infinite ways of building a collection, which is something I think an exhibit like this gives us a great example of. In cooking, the French advise the au pif method, follow your nose. In art, I believe this is also good advice. As your tastes develop, follow your best instincts. And here's just a rundown of all the many ways that Joy and Tim have been interacting with the KIA and the art scene in Kalamazoo. The diversity of the Light collection allows us to see the eclectic expanse of artistic trends that occupied East Asian artists of the 20th century, whether they were working in Asia or abroad in the West. Frankly, it's only been a few short decades since Asian art caught the attention of the larger art world, which was greatly added by the sudden tsunami of international biennales and art fairs, which now welcomed art from everywhere all at once. Museums in the West did a slow uptake. The Asian curators of the 90s were schooled in historical art, not the contemporary. And the contemporary art curators were schooled in Western art. So what do you do with contemporary modern Asian art? This created a bumpy couple of decades before the inclusion of non-Western, modern and contemporary art in Western museums, which radically changed how all art would be exhibited and collected. Now we can see in the same space a painting by an Indonesian artist, as well as a Western minimalist sculpture from Belgium, and a historic Chinese ceramic work, if the curator wants to draw our attention to a theme, subject, technique, or other link we might draw. Although these 26 works are shown together in the KIA today, I see much potential for these works to create conversations with many other pieces in the general KIA collection, which will broaden all our perspectives about the visual world. So to give you a bit of a peek into the collection, I've selected 9 works of art to discuss this evening, but hope you'll be inspired to relook at the entire collection downstairs in the gallery to see what more might strike your interest or draw you to see links with other works in the museum. C.J. Yao was one of Taiwan's preeminent artists in the 1960s, known as an abstract realist painter. A graduate of the National Taiwan Normal University in 1964, Yao became quickly noticed and was chosen to exhibit in the Sao Paulo Biennale in 1970. And that same year, soon after the Biennale, he emigrated to New York City. Enamored with the hyper-realist or photorealism style of several city artists, Yao began printing images of the city. He's best known for his urban reflection series, as we see in the Lights Serigraph, which is a silkscreen print, titled Fast Food Restaurant. This image ironically memorializes the seedy Times Square of the period. Photorealism pushed beyond pop art, whereas pop focused on commonplace objects, photorealism created hyper-photographic-like images of everyday places and events. Yao's skill at rendering multiple reflections within the scene creates a visual vibration of sorts that keeps our eye dancing, from the burlesque theater sign featuring Ginger and Vanessa to the partially hidden yet easily recognizable Burger King sign above that, to the glassy edifice, which is reflecting the street traffic and other stores into its space as a few people pass by. The sharp angle that cuts this remarkable image is formed by the glass surface, and once one becomes oriented, you see that only a sixth of the image on the right side is the outdoors, capturing the dizzying effect of a bustling big city crowded with buildings. It's difficult to make out what sort of store, or is it a restaurant, is on the left with the two Jeroboams, those 4 times the usual size of a bottle of wine, prominently featured there. And yet, confusingly, there's signage inside that is advertising Letraset, a brand of typeface sheets used for the dry transfer method, which revolutionized graphic design in the mid-20th century. Fast food in the title could mean Burger King, or the serving up of lady stripper entertainment, or the bustling intersection where retail, show business, and restaurants flourished in close quarters in the Big Apple. Looking at archival photos from this period, the corner of 1551 Broadway and 46th Street does feature the Follies Burlesque, spelled with a K to save space, I'm not sure, but the sign couldn't be bigger, where, quote, the most beautiful showgirls in the world, unquote, performed in its heyday. This burlesque house and its, quote, all live, whirly, girly review, unquote, took over the Orpheum Dance Palace in the mid-20th century over the popular Howard Johnson's restaurant. In 1976, the burlesque was replaced by the Gaiety Theater, and the featured performers shifted from girls to boys. The Gaiety advertised, quote, 6 boys 5 times daily, quote, and only shut down in 2005, along with Hojo's, when the entire building was sold. As noted, Yao was taken by photorealism, and the one artist he truly admired was the hyperrealist Richard Estes, who was born in 1932 and studied at the Art Institute in Chicago. Estes's painting here, the iconic telephone booths, is a great example of his work. People are peripheral to the gleaming metal and glass booths. Those of us of a certain age remember. As a young emigre moving to this city that never sleeps, these sorts of subjects and the artistic skills that assimilate photographic imagery into painting or printmaking must have been ultra seductive to Yao. What I've not discovered is why Yao turned to silkscreening, which he continued to work on for the rest of his career. Here's a couple more examples of his Reflections series to put in context the serigraph from the Light collection. Reflections and Coca-Cola both give us a clear read on Yao's skill with minute, glassy details that refract through the images. How an artist can make everyday things sublime, things that we might never actually take notice of, is the trick to his art. This art also reminds me of a contemporary Indian photographer who lived abroad but spent much of his career photographing the cultural life of modern India. This is Raghubir Singh's image of a busy intersection through a plate glass window that captures the surging energy and functional mayhem of Bombay, which is now Mumbai, but is still known as the City of Wealth. What interests me is how each of these artists uses the mirroring of city life to capture a particular aspect of contemporary urbanity. Yao's work, however, takes photographic imagery and complicates it in his screen printing, much like Estes did with painting, only more so. Yao also recognized his expatriate status, but stressed his independence as an artist with this quote, and I'm going to read from the screen here below. The native is not restricted to the Chinese tradition alone, nor is the modern the monopoly of the Western world. To be a contemporary overseas Chinese painter, one has to keep abreast of the times, know one's standpoint, and lay a track for one's creativity. Only then can he roll on without stopping to unravel his outlook and his style. So Yao understood very early in his career, and earlier than many art historians, that he could transcend his ethnicity and find his own way and style in the world, which he succeeded in doing. In his career, he has been honored with hundreds of shows in more than a dozen countries. He was also the first overseas artist to be given a permanent professorship title in mainland China, and spent much time back in his Taiwan home giving workshops and exhibiting. Our next work is by the Japanese artist Hiromitsu Takahashi, who specializes in the unique style of stencil printmaking called kapazuri. Hiromitsu grew up in Tokyo. After graduating from law school, he soon returned to his artistic heritage. His parents were artists who did work for our third artist, Mori Yoshitoshi, which is now how the younger Hiromitsu learned of this laborious technique and became committed to keep it alive. Hiromitsu's images focus on kabuki theater, where male actors wear elaborate costumes and makeup and use highly stylized movements and song to enact melodramatic stories about love, loyalty, and the clash between duty and emotion. This kapazuri, or stencil print of the Light collection, shows us a brightly colored kasode, or a short-sleeved kimono, overlaid with a prop of some sort that has a menacing crescent end. This prop, I discovered, is a matoi, a standard that the actor would bob to make a sound between the sphere and the cube on the top, and then twirled to make the streamers fly about, that is associated with heroic firemen. And a heroic fireman was a popular character in kabuki theater. A teen grandson, Lucas Martineau, of Joy's friend Norman Tolman, a renowned dealer of Japanese prints, wrote the book you see here in the center. This was self-published in 2020, and that can still be ordered from his grandfather's gallery, the Tolman Collection. Lucas, then 16, became fascinated by kapazuri technique while visiting his grandfather a few years ago, and this is a successful result of his summer in Tokyo. If I could only have done something like this when I was 16. I have tried to find a photo of each artist discussed today, but have come up empty with Hiromitsu. Although this one-off image of a sumo wrestler, also called Hiromitsu, was created by the artist Hiromitsu, so I don't know if this is a joke, but it's a one-off unusual print by our artist today with the same name. Who usually focuses on the kabuki, as we see in the photograph on the right. Kapazuri, translated as stencil printing, was originally used for dyeing kimono textiles. The roots of this technique were found in the Nara period, the 8th century, when textile artists used paper stencils to guide the application of dyes on fabric. It's a very laborious technique for cloth and for paper that limits print production. So usually only 5 or 15 runs at the max are produced. The finished prints recall ukiyo-e, woodblock prints. However, these can be identified by visible brushstrokes, unevenness of color, a pooling of ink, and margins of gaps and overlaps between colored areas and the black outlines. As Hiromitsu learned this technique from Mori Yoshitoshi, these photos of Mori working help to explain. The initial drawing is attached to the paper, which is made of several sheets of smoke-cured kozu, or mulberry paper, that is glued together with persimmon tannin. So the fruit tannin glues it together, then it's smoked and cured, and that becomes the stencil. Once this is flexible, strong, and water-resistant, the artist cuts with a sharp knife to remove all spaces for color. And then the drawing is removed and the stencil is refined. The stencil is then moistened and placed on the print paper. Resist paste is brushed onto the areas not to be colored, and the stencil lifted off for the stage. Once the resist is dry, color is brushed on desired areas. This process is repeated for every color, beginning from light to dark in a progression. So you definitely see the hand of the artist in this kind of application. Once the print is mostly painted and dry, the final resist paste is rinsed off in clear water, and more hand coloring can be added at this time, as well as Indian ink to reinforce the outlines. And we also see one of Mori's rather complicated stencils here from 1973 on the bottom right. The two Kapazuri prints in the Light collection side by side highlight the technique's focus on a figure or simple composition without a background or contextual setting. Mori's dramatic kabuki figure and Hiromitsu's image of kabuki theater components, a colorful kimono, and the fireman's matoi. Mori Yoshitoshi was born in 1898 and died in 1992. He was a member of the Mingei folk craft movement and produced stencil-dyed textiles prior to the 1950s. His high-end kimono textiles were highly regarded, but when he turned to making more expressionistic prints with a similar printing method in his late 50s, the Mingei leaders were not happy. He was going off the ranch. He was going rogue. That said, he became a major figure in the Sosaku Hanga, or creative print movement, and today his works are found in museums around the world. Another comparison of the two highlights again the penchant Mori had for kabuki actors and Hiromitsu's images of the theatrical elements of the kabuki. Hiromitsu's kumadori, or the traditional makeup worn by kabuki actors on the left here, contrasts with Mori's prints, which tended to be simple compositions of a rather vigorous kabuki figure. And he tends to focus more on earthy tones, whereas Hiromitsu likes full color. In 1962, Mori's prints were featured in James Michener's portfolio of prints, and his book, The Modern Japanese Print, greatly increased Mori's international exposure. Our next artist we will consider today is not originally from East Asia. Clifton Karhu was born in Duluth, Minnesota in 1927. An American of Finnish heritage, he served in the U.S. Navy and was posted in Japan from 46 to 48, just after the war. A son of two painters, he came back to the States to attend the Minnesota Art Museum from 50 to 52, and then returned to Japan as a Lutheran missionary with his wife. They sold Bibles door to door until he became disillusioned with that work and returned to the art world, where he quickly, in Japan, became very successful with his oil paintings and watercolors. In 1963, he and his wife moved to Kyoto, and he began working in woodblock prints, or ukiyo-e. On the right, we see one of his iconic prints collected by the lights. Much of Karhu's work features his admiration for the traditional wooden architecture of the area. As we see here in the lights print titled Gobancho, I'm not sure if this image was inspired by a novel of a similar name that was set in the 1950s, a tragic story of a young girl who was sold into prostitution and the young priest who was her childhood friend and love of her life. And this novel featured exactly this house as its setting. You can see the charming wooden architecture of this old house with its repeated linear elements of the lattice door, the upstairs windows, and the tile roof. A couple more Karhu prints here that feature his favorite architectural subjects of Kyoto. Karhu was named head of the Kyoto branch of the Japan Print Society until he quit in protest because of the Tokyo chapter's neglect of artists in other cities. So there's obviously some competition amongst these groups. Karhu was a bit of a rebel, as noted in his quote about his work here. You don't like it? Hang it upside down. As a non-Japanese, he surely ran into problems from time to time, but as we see from his self-portrait as a blue-eyed samurai, he certainly must have assimilated as much as possible. He had lived for more than a half a century in Japan when he died there in 2007. Wang Binghong is considered one of the last innovators of the literary style and noted for his freehand landscapes. Born in 1865, he's recognized as one of China's greatest 20th century masters, a vigorously original painter. The Light from the Light collection, Landscape, Autumn Lake, displays well this freehand approach with his expressive brushwork. Wang describes the spontaneity in his paintings as, quote, the order of disorder, unquote. While considering the grand topic of nature as an art subject and a muse, this well captures the natural order of disorder with ink on paper. It often helps a viewer to consider a painting in this format in sections. Halfway up this mountain, we find the simple huts that scholars would retreat to simulate their creative life. Wang's brushwork is varied between light washes and details sketched out in thicker wet ink. Notice also the judicious use of negative space that our minds fill in as air, waterfall, or ground. For further comparison, this landscape painting from Chicago is a good example of Wang's admiration for the early Tang and Song painting, with the application here of a teal color that immediately evokes the idea of the Tang dynasty. And that also adds to the atmospheric dimensions of the piece. Two figures, allegedly literati or lettered men of importance, are sitting in a small room open to the lake view. Blurry washes and layers of distinct brush strokes depict an idyllic scene. All of the negative space deepens the landscape. The inscription here alludes to the broken ink of 13th and 14th century masters. Comparing the light painting in the center with two more Wangs, we begin to understand his aesthetic in these vertical works that would have been mounted as hanging scrolls. He's a genius at balancing the negative space in his work along with the multiple viewpoints, as the old masters did. Wang's landscapes zigzag poetically from top to bottom and bottom to top, with the top read as the most distant space, both high and far. Wang was a connoisseur, a scholar, a poet, and publisher at the height of his career. He was passionate about both Western and Chinese art and corresponded with Western intellectuals. He wasn't happy with the foreign occupation by the Manchu dynasty and fled to Shanghai to work for 2 decades as a publisher and editor of art books and journals. In 1934, Wang wrote Principles of Painting to explain 5 ways to use a brush and 7 ways to use ink. A really succinct topic. Not long after that, in 1937, he moved to Beijing to appraise paintings for the nationalist government. Finally, at the age of 80, Wang had his first solo retrospective in Shanghai. Liao Xiaoping is a Taiwanese artist who graduated from the National Taiwan Normal University in 1959 and continued to explore his artistic knowledge in Japan and in France at the École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts and the Atelier des Sept, or Studio 17 in Paris, where he studied painting and engraving. In 1970, he moved to the US and worked as an assistant instructor at the Pratt Institute in New York City. He also taught at the East-West University in Chicago and then returned to Taiwan as well as Japan to teach in the mid-1970s. The light's image is Liao's Autumn, a serigraph or a silkscreen with additional elements made with the calligraphy technique. A few fall leaves, seeds, and 2 rocks dance about and sort of hover above the dark ground. These are beautifully composed, unpretentious elements of nature, a midnight ballet of sorts that one could imagine in a dream. The calligraph process has materials glued or sealed to a rigid substrate of wood or paperboard to make a plate. Once inked, this plate is used to imprint design onto the paper, whereas the silkscreen elements have ink forced through a mesh screen onto a surface with resists on the screen, which acts as sort of a stencil. So when you next view this artwork in person, I wonder if you'll notice which elements might have been made with the overlay of the calligraph print. This particular print is from Liao's Seasons series, which he used certain colors to represent seasons, as well as emotional essences and aspects of everyday life. Liao has worked in many styles that are grouped in a series. Here are just two others. On the left, his pre-symbolic series of the early 60s, and a painting from his Temple Door series on the right. The first painting is an example of how Liao began experimenting with expressiveness through color and surface, and the second reflects his memories of living near a Taiwanese temple as a boy. In both artworks, Liao uses color and shape to evoke his inner history and observations of the real world. Lastly, we have an example of his Symbols of Life series that he began in the 1960s and continued with on and off for decades. In this serograph/calligraph, Liao features a tea set and a few cherries on a table. Objects, man-made and natural, of everyday life are overlaid with a riotous pattern and colors, allowing the black and white tea bowl and a blonde cherry to stand out and startle the viewer. Liao was prolific, producing work constantly, and records show that his work has been in over 200 group and 80 solo shows around the world. And I'm still wondering why the tea bowl is upside down. The secret of the art. Zhang Daxian was one of the first Chinese artists to gain a solid following in the West. Sometimes labeled the Picasso of the East, he was certainly an eccentric character who became one of the most prestigious painters of the 20th century. In fact, he met with Picasso and exchanged paintings, and then also sent the European master 2 Chinese brushes made from 2,500 hairs of 3-year-old cows. That's a present. Although Zhang was a gifted painter of traditional Chinese art, by the 1960s he worked in both impressionistic and expressionistic modes. The lotus was one of his very favorite subjects. A symbol of purity, renewal, and hope, lotus buds emerge from the mucky ponds to bloom gloriously above. Zhang quoted Lao Tzu, the philosopher of Taoism, to explain his artistic intent. Quote, and it's on the screen there, procure the essence and transcend the phenomena. In this lotus painting from the Light Collection, we see several lotuses at various stages of bloom and the floppy lotus pads. While water lily blossoms and pads stay on the water's surface, lotuses and their pads shoot out of the water, sometimes rising 4 or more feet above the surface. We can compare 2 of Zhang's lotus paintings. The Light's lotus painting in the middle here is one of his earlier pieces, and the lotus painting from the Metropolitan Museum of New York's collection on the left was painted almost 40 years later. The latter brings in a bit of color and was painted just a couple of years before his death. Although it was said that Zhang had trouble with his vision in his last years, the details of the Met painting certainly don't seem to have been painted by somebody struggling with his eyesight, especially when considering the calligraphy and sharp details. Both paintings display the artist's virtuosity with his brush that gives the shimmering splash effects of ink on wet surface that he contrasts with the added details of a sharp dry brush. We also see on the right how the Met has mounted their lotus painting in the traditional manner of a hanging vertical scroll, and now I see that we also have our lotus painting is also conserved, but I didn't have a photograph to tell me that earlier. One of the most dazzling lotus paintings by Zhang is this gold screen painted in 1973, a nod to his travels in Japan. This sold last year at Sotheby's auction for $250,000 Hong Kong dollars, or about 32 million US. It's said that Zhang's mother taught him to paint flowers when he was just a small boy, and at 19 he left China to study textile dyeing and weaving in Kyoto. He also would speak of his time in Japan, how how he learned to artificially age silks and paper, suggesting there were fraudulent practices within the art world he was now a part of. Back in China in the early 40s, he studied, copied, and cataloged cave paintings in Dunhuang, a famous cave site in the far west of China. While there, he also peeled away layers of plaster to expose earlier paintings beneath, which ruined the other paintings that he peeled away, which motivated the Chinese government to get their act together and set up protective measures at the site. Milo Beach, the former director of the Sackler and Freer Galleries in Washington, D.C., described Zhang as, quote, not a man of moderation in either his art or his personal life. He married 4 women, a couple of them at the same time, and fathered 16 children. As he traveled the world, he built elaborate gardens wherever he lived, China, Brazil, Taiwan, and the US, including his homes in Carmel by the Sea, California. Over his lifetime, it's thought that he's created over 30,000 paintings. Obviously a man of big appetites and passions, he is credited by many as transforming traditional Chinese painting into a contemporary idiom. Several Chinese painting collections have some works labeled by other, often earlier Chinese artists that Zhang actually made. Not as a forgery, Zhang insisted, but as earnest copies of certain works that were lost but described in catalogs. On the other hand, he did forge others, including calligraphy. He would age his works with hair dryers and created seals to make fake provenance. It's estimated that Zhang made at least 10 million from his forgeries. According to Zhang, he aimed not to copy, but to recreate and surpass the earlier masters. This game of wits he termed, quote, a life of playfulness, unquote, which becomes confusing for collectors and scholars as we're aware of the masterpieces of earlier times that were recreated by later artists as an ode to the work and in order to keep the work alive. A very different concept that we have today, especially in the West, that we know as plagiarism. This painting example was signed by Yuan, somebody named Yuan, but stamped 4 times with Zhang's name. Apparently, this artist enjoyed playing with the fakery that teased the art world, which he found a little too weak tea for his taste. And there's still loads of art historians that love to go into museum collections and point out the fake Zhangs that they feel are there. Tsuji Waku was born in Japan in 1953 and is a graduate of Zohai University in Tokyo. Wako works in lithography, which involves an image painted in oil on a flat surface, usually aluminum plate these days. Water and oil don't mix, so the artist draws the image in oil, fat, or wax on a smooth surface. A chemical solution is applied so that the water receptive areas don't print and the greased marks do. An ink roller presses the wet surface to receive the ink onto paper. Wako's work showcases Japanese motifs through a modernist prism. He excels at especially complex patterning, and most of his work also includes gold leaf applied using animal glue. His subjects are traditional Japanese small objects that are composed in a type of balancing act that is meticulously worked in a photorealistic style against a dark ground. The light collection image here, Ball and Puzzle, juxtaposes a small hand puzzle on top of a tamari, a small toy ball that is made from winding colorful threads geometrically around a sphere, and a beautifully patterned textile with 2 different pattern sides that is draped over a small golden frame that is standing on a corner, plus a ribbon tie that encircles another little puzzle in the foreground. So incredibly complex, but the dark ground in the contrast seems to really sort of pull everything together in this balancing act. His works feature these beautiful objects, which often include origami, cranes, and other leisure playthings. Occasionally, he also attaches found objects like stamps on the surface. Shades of Han on the right is an apt title as this was the period of the novel of Telugunji, where aristocrats lolled about in piles of gorgeous kimonos in a period of peace and abundance, a so-called golden era that art and literature often refer to in new and exciting ways, just as Baku has done here. Many of these traditional games may also have been popular at the time. His emphasis on such an emphera is very sparse, but the sharp arrangement of beautiful things. Lastly, I want to highlight a female artist of note, Shinoda Tolko, and her innovative work. Hans Namuth, who took this photo of Shinoda in 1956, is most famous for his shoots of Jackson Pollock creating his action paintings, those photographs led to a greater understanding of Pollock's work. Perhaps this is why he photographed Shinoda, who also uses a great deal of physicality with her large gestural brushstrokes. She would paint on her zinc plates and then add additional color by hand if needed. This would render each work in the print edition an original. In the work collected by the Lights, Shinoda's triptych, New Dimensions, it is very clear that this is all about the brushwork. The plethora of different brushstrokes and the drama of their composition are a grand experiment that artists were exploring at the time, making the actual making the muse, the subject. Here are two more examples of her work that illustrate the multitude of ways she explored brushwork. We learn in art history classes that brush and ink are key elements of the art of East Asia, but after millennia, there's still more to discover, and Shinoda does this. Born in China in 1913, her Japanese family moved home to Tokyo when she was 1. She was taught calligraphy as a young child, and at 23, she ran away from home to live on her ability to teach calligraphy. In her early 40s, she moved to New York, also in 1956, where she created large-scale paintings and prints. Shinoda has said that she was impressed by the freedom that American artists had, whereas she felt that too many Japanese copied traditional styles. Of course, there were interesting contemporary artists in Japan that explored freedom from traditional ways, like the Gutai movement, but perhaps as someone who practiced calligraphy, she was thinking only of brushwork and preferred what she saw in New York, or what she was allowed to do in New York, rather than Tokyo. Active until the end of her very long life, Shinoda became a favorite artist of the former imperial family and is the only artist to this time in Japan to have been immortalized on a postage stamp. Shinoda painted Vermilion Harvest here on the right when she was 96. Her sensibility about how she reserves negative space, a traditional practice called upaku in Japan, is felt in all her compositions. She curates her brushstrokes to work together, speaking to her calligraphic roots, but scaled way up in this hybrid form. In the end, the light collection of works on display at the KIA reminds me of the concept of shuhari, which is the Japanese art of mastery. It describes the 3 stages of development in a creative person. Shu, keeping or adhering to the form and rules of an art by following a teacher or a master example without question. Ha, a sort of digression or willful veering away from the tradition with the intent to explore. And Ri, a transcendent state achieved through long practice and focus, where the act of creating happens naturally and the work of the highest order stems from the deepest roots of an artist's being. The artworks in this exhibit demonstrate individual masteries of visual expression, but we also may see how the art of collecting is a learning process as well, and the mastery in this case is self-evident. Thank you.